Good day, my friends. I hope this day has found itself agreeable with you. First, I just want to say thank you to everyone who decided to leave a comment or a question in the video I posted last weekend. This channel might be small, but there's no reason that we can't have a little fun with it. And that's why today, I think you can tell there's no script. I want to try and come off as genuine as possible when opening this dialogue with all of you. So without further ado, let's get into this 1,000 subscriber special Q&A. Jake asks, when one world falls and the world or worlds that remain that get the boost of power, what would the remaining worlds feel, if anything? Is there even a level of awareness to that? I assume what you're asking, Jake, is whether or not the other shards can tell if a shard has rejoined with the source. Of course, the source definitely knows when something has been rejoined because that's a calamity. But the other shards? I can't assume they do. Of course, the only other shard we've been in contact with is the first. Sure, we've talked to some people that have come from the 13th world, but that was the first failure of the Ascians. They didn't have the chance to experience any other shards being rejoined to the source. I can only assume no. I can only assume that the other shards would have no idea that one of their reflections had rejoined with the source, that all those people had died and perished to rejoin with their counterparts on our reality. And there's no evidence on the first that suggests like they experienced any sort of calamity that resonated with all of the 7 rejoinings that had already happened to the source. So I would say no. They have, the other fragments probably have no idea they're just a reflection of another world. Unless they've become so developed in the arcane arts that they're able to peer past the veil and see that they're one part of a greater whole. If they haven't gotten that far in the arcane, though, I would argue they have no clue what's going on. Gefnir asks, what race and or clan art thou? By mine assumptions, I assume thou art an awesome and handsome Elysian. But due to thou's choice of attire, I cannot ascertain if thou art of the clan Wildwood, or the remarkably handsome yet xenophobic Duskwhite clan. Good lord, I felt like I need to have my pinky out reading that. Yeah, as you can clearly tell by the ears sticking through the hood, I am indeed an Elysian, and if you look at the complexion right beneath my mask, you can pretty safely assume that I'm Wildwood. Yes, I am a Wildwood Elysian. Though, to be fair, I almost picked Duskwhite, right? I almost picked Duskwhite when I came to 14. So, fun fact. Neo Jax says, please do Omega Raid lore videos to get us ready for Endwalker. Sure. I'll happily cover Omega for you. I don't know how much good that's gonna do for Endwalker, since most of that storyline kind of wrapped itself up in Stormblood, but sure, let's talk about Omega, buddy. Fire-breathing turtle dragon doodler. Wow, I love that name. How long have you been playing Final Fantasy XIV for? I want to know if it's really worth a long commitment playing. Okay, so... oh boy. So, any of you listening may know that 1.0 was a financial disaster. I started playing Final Fantasy XIV when it was in its 1.0 beta form, right? I started playing that, and honestly, it was bad. It was bad. I wasn't impressed. A lot of the game mechanics didn't make sense. You were punished for teleporting because of this resource called anima, and the game had very little to no direction. It was like, imagine trying to continue the MSQ with no little icons over the NPC's head telling you who to talk to. It was really that bad. And then I was sitting there going, man, wow, this is kind of awful, but I see a lot of people also feel the same way. Hopefully they fix a lot of these problems before launch. And then 1.0 launched, and they didn't. They didn't fix any of the problems. And I only managed to play like for a month before I got horribly bored because it was so bad. I was the only one in my group of friends that was playing it, and I don't know about any of you, I can't play an MMO by myself. I need people to hang out with, I need people to adventure with to really get that full experience. And I stopped playing. In hindsight, part of me wishes I kept playing so that I would like have some of the veteran awards, but hey, I didn't have enough money to pay for a subscription to a game I didn't enjoy. Yeah, so I stopped playing 14, and then ta-da, a couple years later, 2.0 is released, and I was skeptical, really skeptical at first, right? And it took one of my buddies saying, no, it's completely different, it's completely remastered, new functions, jobs, everything. You can't even compare it to 1.0. And I'm like, okay, fine. If they've really done that great a job, I'll be willing to give it a shot at least. Because I love Final Fantasy. So I started up 14 again and downloaded 2.0. I completely abandoned my 1.0 character and everything because I was just like, you know what? I want to give this game a fair shake. I want to give it a fair chance. So I started completely fresh, new character, new everything. And I still play that character to this day. No, yeah, I was blown away. Like many people, coming into 2.0 after playing 1.0, it was like night and day. It was amazing. It was colorful, the characters were so much more animated and interesting, the story actually made sense, the jobs felt more interesting, and I have happily played 14 ever since restarting 2.0. I mean, sure, there are times I take like a break from the game now and then to play other games or do other things, but I never need an excuse to turn on Final Fantasy XIV and play with friends or just goof around in the game, like in Gold Saucer, Party Finder, and all sorts of stuff. Like, if you love the MMO experience, if you love high fantasy, I would totally give Final Fantasy XIV that, I guess I want to say, commitment is the right word here, because it does a lot of things for a lot of people. If you like story, it's got story. If you enjoy combat, we got some flashy combat here. Sure, this game might not be everyone's cup of tea, but as a lot of people have noticed, it hits a lot of check marks that a lot of people love, which is why it's gotten so popular over the years. So to answer the question in more simple terms, yes, I've been playing Final Fantasy since 1.0's beta, and here I am. I love it. Yoshi P is Final Fantasy XIV's Lord and Savior. Moving on. Shinryu asks, here's my question. How did you get into Final Fantasy XIV as well as the rest of the series? So, I feel like that the previous question kind of covered me getting into Final Fantasy XIV. But the entire reason I wanted to play Final Fantasy XIV Online was because I already was a huge fan of Final Fantasy. I played Final Fantasy XI to shout out to any Final Fantasy XI veterans and fans out there. Yes, I remember Valcom Dunes. Those days were, yeah, they were something, weren't they? I know. Okay, so only Final Fantasy XI players are gonna get this, but I'll make this joke at least. I can only assume all of you who hear people who play 14 who complain about how grindy things are, that you kind of just roll your eyes, don't you? You kind of just lean back in your chair going, buddy, you didn't play 11, you have no clue what grindy in a Final Fantasy MMO is. Yeah, that game was something for sure back during its heyday. I hear it's a lot easier to get through now, but vanilla Final Fantasy XI, holy shit. But as the Final Fantasy series as a whole, I've been interested in since I was a kid. One of my friends actually first showed me, he was showing off Final Fantasy IX to me, and I loved it. The characters, the spells, the fantasy, the airships, frickin' chocobos, it was amazing, and I wanted to experience it. And as I grew up, I made sure to make investments that allowed me to play old Final Fantasy games and experience the series as a whole. I've played most Final Fantasy games at this point. There are some I haven't played, and I'm not gonna say I liked all of them. I didn't. But for the most part, Final Fantasy franchise has a special place in my heart because every single story, even though they all share the same name, every single one is a unique world with all sorts of love and dedication put into it. And that's what I love about the Final Fantasy franchise so much. And in case anyone asks, Final Fantasy III is my favorite because that one is the one that introduced a lot of mechanics, jobs, and story beats that resonate through the rest of the Final Fantasy franchise to this day. Like, Final Fantasy III, in my mind, is the one that set the bar. Final Fantasy I got the ball rolling, Final Fantasy II was an experiment, but Final Fantasy III was the one that, whoo, yeah, boom, they nailed it. And that's the formula they've been following ever since. Cameron Drew asks, how well versed are you in the Final Fantasy as a series? As someone who jumped in with 14, it's been really cool going through the other games and seeing all the returning mobs, names, and weapons. Similar to last question, yes. My experience with Final Fantasy dates back since I was a little sweet, innocent child, and it has impressed me year after year after year. And you're right. One of the most fun parts about Final Fantasy is some of the names, devices being used over and over again. Because like I said a moment ago, sure, it may use some names, abilities, and monsters more than once, but the world and the story is almost always unique and interesting. So it's like getting a new meal every time, but they're putting on like spices and herbs that you're familiar with that add that like kick of familiarity. So it's a new meal, but you can taste what you're used to tasting now and then, and it's still freaking delicious. I think my favorite part about Final Fantasy XIV is that, sure, it's taking a lot of liberties from other Final Fantasy games, but instead of it saying, oh hey, here's the Crystal Tower, that's a reference to Final Fantasy III, isn't that cool? Don't you love the Crystal Tower? No. It's not just a reference. They made it part of the world. It has nothing to do with Final Fantasy III. It's a reference in name only. Because as far as this game is concerned, it serves a purpose, it was made by certain people, and has fulfilled certain designs. And I love that. And they've done that with all the other winks and nods to other Final Fantasy games as well in 14. So hats off to them and the writing team for including all these things so seamlessly. Cameron Drew also asks, I'm currently how much of your stuff comes directly from the game and books and how much is informed speculation? Right. I'm going to assume you're asking how much of my information is straight from the game and novelizations, and how much is essentially Wikipedia information. I can say with 100% confidence, none of my videos use resources outside of the game and publications. It's a research method you learn very early on when writing papers like this. Never use third-party sources, ever. It's unreliable, people post whatever they want, and speculation is bad in terms of information gathering. So yes, so the gross majority of my information comes from the game itself, Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 1, and Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 2. However, those little story snippets I like draft up for the start of like the job videos and some other videos now and then, I will admit, those are completely mine. You won't find them in game, you won't find them in the books. I drafted those myself to try and like make little stories to kind of prime up the video and make it more interesting. I will admit those aren't complete. So yeah, those are completely me. Don't take them at face value. They are not events that have happened, but the way I write them, they are events that could have happened. I make sure to religiously check my sources over and over again and make sure, if given the information I have, these events could have happened. Did they? Probably not, but it's fun to imagine that they might have. So no, don't take my writing at the start of the videos as gospel, but everything else I can trace back to in-game dialogue, cutscenes, and pages from the Encyclopedia Eorzeas. So, good question. I assume a lot of people probably ask that. Ryan Koslin says, if you have a Twitch, you should stream with your students in dungeon runs as an expedition where along the dungeon you're enlightening everyone on the history and/or culture of the dungeon. That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. If not streaming on Twitch, it would definitely be a fun video idea. A departure from what I'm used to doing, but interesting nonetheless. Honestly, that's up to all of you. I mean, if you think you would be interested in me streaming content sometime, then by all means, let's do it. But as some of you might have guessed already, I have no budget, resources, or anything, so the quality of such streams would be not as good as popular streamers. I mean, heck, I'm currently recording for you underneath a blanket to improve sound quality. That's the resources we're working with here, ladies and gentlemen. Not a Hero asks, in the Shadowbringers campaign, we learned that the Ascians used half of the population to summon Zodiark, but some among them, afraid of the Elder Primal, decided to summon Hydaelyn. Taking that into consideration, what was actually sacrificed for summoning of the Mother Crystal? And in that regard, why is she getting weaker as time passes? All of that was explained in the MSQ, though to be fair, it was a lot of information to process all at once, so I understand why a lot of people might have missed this. So yes, you're right. They sacrificed a massive amount of their population to create Zodiark. And Elidibus became Zodiark's heart, or guiding conscience, kind of like how Lady Iceheart was the guiding spirit within Shiva. But Zodiark didn't stop there. Basically, what happened was, sure, his existence did bring stability to their world. It wasn't ending anymore, but now it was kind of desolate and ruined. So they sacrificed another chunk of Ascians to Zodiark for him to basically inject life back into the world and make sure things could thrive once again. That's why the original Ascian plan wasn't rejoinings and all of this nonsense. It was actually they were going to wait for life on the world that Zodiark had created to reach a certain level, for their populations to reach a certain mass, that they would sacrifice all of these creatures and people en masse to act as fuel for Zodiark to bring back all of the souls and people that were sacrificed to summon him and to revive the world. So basically, they were going to sacrifice the lives of everything else on the world to bring back the Ascians that had died. And if you're thinking, wow, that's actually kind of twisted, well, a certain person named Vana agrees with you. You see, she fundamentally disagreed with this method. She felt that they were relying on Zodiark way too much, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with him. She didn't like the idea of them constantly feeding things to this entity. So, what was her plan? She and a bunch of the remaining Amarosians did the same thing. They sacrificed themselves en masse, and Vana became the heart or conscience of the entity we call Hydaelyn. So the energy that was sacrificed to create Hydaelyn, or the Mother Crystal as you put it, was the same thing that Zodiark used. They are both made from the spirits and essence of the people we saw in the Lost City of Amarot. Even though Hydaelyn didn't have as many lives to fuel her creation as Zodiark did, what made her so strong was her powers, the ability to divide. All she had to do was strike Zodiark once, and then suddenly his power was cut in two. That's what made her so strong compared to him. And then the Sundering happened, and like I said, yada yada yada, here we are today. The reason she's getting weaker as time passes, I can't say for certain, right? Unfortunately, when it comes to the nature of Zodiark and Hydaelyn, their creation is extremely unique as far as primals go. There's a lot I don't know, but I can only assume it's similar to the rules that the other primals have to follow. Their existence is fueled by power, and I can only assume Hydaelyn has gone her entire life trying to live off of what power she was given and not take a single drop from the world. Now, that's just a guess on my part. It could be something else entirely. But one thing's for certain, she is definitely weaker than she was when she fought Zodiark. Time as a primal may be slowly eroding her existence. I can't say for certain. Or maybe it's the fact that instead of holding on to her power, she put it back into the world, back into life, you know what I mean? So yeah, the simple answer as to why she's getting weaker, I don't know. And I assume she might tell her herself when Endwalker comes out. Trust me, I'm super excited for this expansion. Ryusaki from Twitter asks, how long have you been reading the history of Eorzea? Since the very beginning, I have been learning more about this world. To be fair though, I kind of do that with a lot of games I play. If there's two things I love in life, it's writing and creating fantastical fantasy worlds and experiencing and reading about fantastical worlds. Hopefully one day I get to write a story that other people want to research just as much as I do for Final Fantasy XIV. I like Pi21234 asks, the ink art and the latest videos are so cool. I didn't know you could draw. When did you start drawing? Okay, so misconception there. I'm not the one drawing them. At the end of the videos, and in the description of my videos, I put a link to the artist that's been helping me recently. Her name is Caddy, and she actually made some pictures and wrote a letter for this very video. So I will read that for you now. Call me Maple Azrak. On me voyages, I'd paint the horizons I saw, write down the stories from distant shores, and mail 'em off to me beloved who's back at home. Me best mates always used to say I should visit Eorzea for the sights. It was the home of me forefathers, after all. But what brought me to these shores was not the tales of grandeur or promise of gold, but rather stories from several foreign reports. Stories of knights standing in a line in the city of Ul'dah, filling the streets wall to wall, doing so not in a show of force, but in solidarity, for a fallen warrior that even I heard of and how he was famous for going berserk. I wanted to come and see such a land, for I knew a true story when I heard one. I wanted to come and see how a land could inspire so many people to do something so moving. I asked me beloved if I should go. Given the cost and time investment, a land like Eorzea could drain us. But he said I should, under one condition, to tell him every tale from this God-graced realm. When I arrived, it was everything I'd expected and more. But me communication skills ain't the best, so I turned to the bards of this land to learn of its lore. For they shouted loud enough that even the gods could hear them. It was then I met a peddler who was reciting lectures from a professor verbatim, marketing some classes. I knew I needed to be there in person to listen in on one of these lessons. And beyond the professor's buttery smooth voice, it became one of the most boring things I ever witnessed. I'd rather be keel-hauled by a stampede of dung-covered dodos than sit through there watching this man speak in a blank room. All he owns is his voice, but his words be strong, and I stand by talent when I see it. So I did what any rational person would do in me situation. Rather than critique how he could bring some fanfare to his lectures, I stalked the masked git after the class to learn his true identity, cornered him, and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. Now I work for the bloke and make him pretty pictures to show his wee students. I do not know how long I'll stay in this land, or if me contract with me current captain will evolve into a lifelong friendship or another bitter, bloody end, but none of that matters in the now. Allow me to address ye personally, dear listeners. The more ye interact with the old professor reading this letter to you, the more ye make 'em happy. The happier they be, the more stories they can share, and each story they share be yet another tall tale that this old sea wench can send back home to their beloved. From the bottom of me heart, I can't thank ye enough for that. Sincerely, Azrak. It's true. She actually did message me on Twitter after finding my YouTube channel and insisted that we could use pretty pictures to really spice up the channel. And personally, I think it's a great thing. I think these pictures that she's been drawing are absolutely lovely, and I look forward to making even more complicated set pieces in the future with her. That being said, I'll be leaving her Twitter handle in the description of this video as well, in case you want to see her yourself. She's got a lot of stuff over on her Twitter accounts. But honestly, that about wraps us up for this Q&A. Not too many questions, but I feel like I got to talk about a lot of things, so this was a lot of fun. So I guess I just want to say thank you so much to the 1,000 people that decided to not only come and indulge my channel, but to subscribe and participate as well. I still plan on making all sorts of videos, be it jobs, locations, people, history, and so on. Me and Caddy are still going to go out of our way to try and make sure there's interesting set pieces for you to enjoy as well. And while this channel might be small, and I'm not the only Final Fantasy XIV YouTuber that covers lore, that's for sure, but maybe one day it'll get large enough that I can actually sit down and maybe talk with some of the writers on the Final Fantasy XIV team and get some exclusive tidbits for everyone to enjoy in the future. I'd like to do that for you all sometime. Maybe one day. Till then, I am the Synodic Scribe. Thank you for coming in, and I look forward to seeing you at the next lecture. Stay safe, my friends.